If you've been following the run-up to the July 4th general election in Britain, you'll have noticed that at first it was terribly dull and a painfully insipid affair. The Conservative Party was listlessly limping along, with nothing of any interest to say for itself, because after 14 years in government, it was evident that it was responsible for the myriad problems that beset this country. The Brexit majority that Boris won on the strength of his charisma and the promise to get Brexit done turned into a strange and almost unbelievable betrayal, as he totally inverted the underpinning motives of Brexit. Returning sovereignty to the UK and ending free movement were the two primary driving factors behind most Brexit voters, and Boris instead outsourced our sovereignty to NATO through his obsession with prolonging the Ukraine war, and simply decided to open the borders to all and sundry. When he was arrogantly stabbed in the back by the Gove faction of the Conservative Party, the party members elected Liz Truss to be the new party leader against her nearest rival, Boris's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak. Truss decided she was going to implement a neo-Thatcherite agenda of lowering taxes to stimulate the economy, and in fewer than 2 months of her premiership, she was deposed by a coup carried out by the Bank of England. We know this because she gave us all of the details in the interview we did with the former Prime Minister for lotuseaters.com, which I will link in the description and I strongly suggest you watch because it is eye-opening about how power functions in this country. In this interview, she was completely frank about how Westminster and more pertinently how Whitehall actually works, and explained how it was the Bank of England, which was made independent of the government by Tony Blair in 1997 incidentally, was able to formulate an economic crisis against her to force the Conservative Party to remove her.
Connor, you asked what evidence do I have that they were deliberately undermining me? Well, the night before the mini budget, the Bank of England sold £40 billion of gilts. And then we had the LDI crisis, which emerged. Kwasi and I were not told that there was a massive tinderbox waiting if interest rates went up, and everybody knew interest rates were going to go up. The Bank of England then set a very short-term cliff edge for that issue to be resolved, thereby generating more uncertainty. And if you look at what the Bank of England is meant to do, they're meant to assure financial stability. And they didn't take action that would have done that. They didn't act in support of the government, which was their job. And then the Office of Budget Responsibility effectively leaked a forecast that was wrong, but it forecast a whole of £70 billion. And that was put out deliberately to destabilise the government. I don't know who leaked it, whether it was the ABR or the Treasury, but clearly they were trying to demonstrate to the world that they didn't support my policy.
Truss might not be their gal, so to speak, but she was relatively popular inside the party and her heart seems to be in the right place. And more importantly, she herself is not a globalist. So the powers that be, which are apparently above the elected government, settled on the defeated Sunak, a former Goldman Sachs investment banker, who was then installed as Prime Minister in October 2022. And less than 2 years into his premiership, the party was slowly and sluggishly slipping down in the polls, because things were getting dramatically worse. Sunak continued the insane policy of infinite migration, which Truss's opposition towards formed a part of the reason that she was ousted, by the way, by letting in 2.5 million new immigrants in his tenure, so that the country is quite literally falling apart. Everyone is getting poorer. The transport infrastructure is full to bursting. The NHS is being driven into the ground with 1/6 of the entire country on a waiting list. House prices and rents are through the roof. People are struggling to find jobs. The list of problems caused by overpopulation goes on and on and on. And of course, the miraculous economic growth promised by this flood of foreigners did not materialise, and instead, the benefits that we are paying out to them is bankrupting us. And this is to say nothing of the cultural damage that has been done to our country. Our town centres look like bazaars in Baghdad. Quiet English towns and villages are flooded by strangers from literally all over the globe. Africans, East Asians, South Asians, South Americans, and bizarrely, sometimes even refugees from popular holiday destinations are wandering around our streets, none of them net contributors to the economy, but all of them able to draw state benefits and access public services. Even more odd is the fact that 290,000 dependents are allowed to come to the country every year, which creates baffling circumstances, such as half of the taxpayer-funded housing in London going to people who were born overseas. Of the entire population of Somalis in Britain, nearly 3/4 of them live in a house funded by the British taxpayer. Why? Why are we paying for Somalis to live in Britain? Nobody knows. Nobody seems to have any sane answers to such sensible questions. Instead, we live in an immigration madhouse, and there appears to be no end in sight. So on a damp May day, a month ago now, when Rishi Sunak stood out in the rain without a coat and decided to call a general election, one might think that it would be something of a relief.
It might still be hard when you look at your bank balance. But this hard-earned economic stability was only...
The fact that Remainer tosspot Steve Bray was able to interrupt Sunak's speech by playing Tony Blair's new Labour anthem, "Things Can Only Get Better," just served to really hammer the point home. There is only Blairism, which means there is only managerial globalism, either from the Conservative Party or from the opposition, because Keir Starmer's Labour Party is not much more of an appealing prospect. The battle of who would hold the reins to continue the Blair legacy was on. Would it be the Indian CBeebies presenter that literally nobody asked for, or would it be the platonic ideal of a local bank manager who would carry on business as usual? As you might imagine, the public wasn't exactly gripped with excitement over this choice, and as the default alternative, Labour were well ahead in the polls because when Conservative voters do not like how their party is being run, they simply do not turn out to vote. Starmer had squeaked by at a few by-elections with lower than usual turnout, but in which the Conservative vote had completely collapsed, and it appeared that this would be the pattern for the entire country in the general election. The Conservatives would have gone from winning over Labour heartlands under Boris the Betrayer, seats which had never before voted Tory, to cratering down into opposition for a decade under the auspices of David Cameron's diversity hires. How bloody boring, and so completely foolish. Well, no wonder people are checking out of politics and hunkering down to endure the collapse, because we are clearly not actually represented in our own political system, and apparently can do nothing to get it under our control. But then, something happened. A poll came back from the refugee town of Clacton-on-Sea. I say refugee town because Clacton has many displaced English people from London who felt forced out during the period of great diversification of England's capital that began under the Blair years and continued under the Conservative years. Clacton was the only place in the country ever to send a UKIP MP to Parliament, a lovely gent called Douglas Carswell, and this poll suggested that it was still a quite UKIP-y area and were going to return a candidate who is not a part of the Uniparty consensus. Clacton was going to vote for the Reform Party. Richard Tice was, at the time, the well-meaning but uninspiring leader of the Reform Party, and it didn't seem like it was going anywhere. Reform's true leader, Nigel Farage, Mr. Brexit himself, had made plans to go to the United States and help Donald Trump campaign, and did not seem interested in leaving his cushy job as a presenter for GB News. However, this poll seems to have changed his mind. And with that, the race was on. Tice graciously made way for the true king of reform, and Farage retook his place as the leader of the British right, and suddenly this election became electric. Farage wisely decided he was going to make this the immigration election, and started just saying everything we've been saying on the issue for years to the entire country without any apology.
If you've got net migration running at 750,000 a year, it's not surprising the size of the economy grows. But the income per head has fallen for the last 6 consecutive quarters. The penny is beginning to drop. Mass migration is making us poorer. Mass migration means our kids and grandkids can't get houses. Mass migration means rents are up between 20 and 30% in the last 3 years alone in this country. Mass migration means I almost missed this interview. The traffic is now so bad on our roads because 6 million more people live here than when the Conservatives came to power. Now, you can argue economics all you like, but I'll tell you something. This is now the 5th manifesto in a row from the Conservatives that has promised they'll reduce net migration. No one believes them, and Labour have almost nothing to say.
Farage is, after his long career as a campaigner, at the absolute top of his game. It was evident in the way he completely smashed the lame representatives of the establishment consensus in 2 7-way leaders' debates. It's been amazing, and things can only get better. The energy is with him, and it is well and truly on. So far, in the space of only 2 weeks, Farage has sent reform rocketing up the polls to surpass the Conservative Party itself, with one poll putting reform at 19% to the Conservative 18%, and a new poll from Matt Goodwin has reform at 24% to the Conservatives 15%. And interestingly, Labour down from their confident position in the mid-40s to only 35%. This only took him a fortnight, and there are still 2 weeks to go. In this time, he has basically destroyed one of the 2 major parties. He is able to absolutely cut through his opponents. Rhetorically, the man is a master, but he also holds the winning hand. He is the only non-Blairite in the race who is prepared to actually name the problem of national suicide and has put together a very sensible manifesto that will actually deal with the problem. He is prepared to put a stop to mass immigration, and that is what this country has been so desperately crying out for. All his opponents can offer is more of the same managed decline, and it really feels like everyone is starting to realise that now is the time to dig in their heels and refuse the uniparty consensus. No, we have a choice, and we might just take it. Farage is campaigning furiously, and everyone can feel that there is a tide turning. At first, it looked like he was going to secure a single seat in Parliament. Then, it looked like he might even turn reform into the loyal opposition. But now, it's starting to look like he might flip the entire board over and achieve the unthinkable. I have learned that one should never make predictions in politics. You do not know how things are going to go. But if you're watching this video in the future and Farage has failed, I want you to understand that right now, all of the major parties who are promising more of the same are very afraid of Farage, and I guarantee to you they're all starting to wonder if he might just do it. All it takes for him to flip the Conservative vote, and a sizable portion of the Labour vote, is to actually offer the thing people really want. And he's doing it. The ordinary folk are talking about him in the pubs. They're seeing his name all over the press. The younger generations are memeing about him all over social media. He is the man, and it seems that the hour has come.